Hi, good morning, bonjour tout le monde. Aujourd'hui, la session va être principalement en anglais. Nos 3 conférenciers ne sont pas du Canada, donc on a le grand plaisir d'accueillir des conférenciers qui viennent d'Europe. So I'll switch right now to English, but quand ce sera le temps des questions, n'hésitez pas à les poser en français si vous voulez. Je peux faire la traduction et avec aussi l'application qu'on a montrée tout à l'heure, vous pouvez lire la traduction de leurs réponses. So welcome everybody to this session. We'll talk about the linkages between climate change and the circular economy. So as you know, the circular economy is a new production and consumption model aiming to reduce the impact of human activities to below planetary boundaries. And climate change, of course, is a very important challenge right now, is one of these planetary boundaries that we talk a lot about. And we have many, many policies and actions in order to decrease our impact on climate. So we know that the circular economy can mitigate climate change in many, many ways. Some circular economy strategies, of course, lead to the use of less resources and resource extraction, transformation. All these activities lead to a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So, of course, implementing the circular economy is going to decrease all these emissions. However, most climate change policies are not really suitable to promote the circular economy because of the way that we account on our emissions in terms of policies and also often in terms of organizations. So, for instance, we can think about some circular economy strategies that are going to lead to a lower amount of resources, but if these resources are extracted in other countries or transformed in other countries, then it doesn't affect our own GHG emission inventories. So it looks like it doesn't have an effect, but in fact, it has a huge effect on climate change. The same with organizations, as most of circular economy strategies are going to impact Scope 3 emissions, and sometimes we focus a lot on Scope 1 and 2 emissions because Scope 3 can be difficult to quantify, resource intensive, so sometimes we don't see the benefits of these strategies. So today, the idea of this session is to talk about that, to explore the linkages between climate change and the circular economy, also to identify what are the barriers preventing climate action from becoming a catalyst for the deployment of circular economy, and also, of course, explore potential solutions, how we can get rid of those barriers and make sure that we have synergies between climate action and the implementation of the circular economy. So to begin with, I will present our first speaker. He's Tom Rommens, R&D professional in materials management and circular economy for VITO in Belgium. And he'll talk to us about capturing the climate change mitigation benefits of circular economy policies and measures. So please welcome Tom.
Okay, how this works. Yeah, all right, thank you for the introduction, and it's really a pleasure to be here today to show you some results of work we've been doing for the European Environment Agency, and which is on the topic, of course, of climate change mitigation benefits of circular economy policies and measures. My name is Tom Rommens. I'm working for VITO. VITO is a Belgian research organization. We do research on sustainable development in several spheres, the regenerative economy, the healthy environment, and resilient ecosystems. And one of our clients is the European Environment Agency. Who are they? That's an EU agency that operates, again, on the interface of science and policy. And their aim is to provide policymakers with timely, reliable, targeted, and relevant information to support the development of their policies and sustainability. It's about relevant information. That means that they look at the policy agenda and they look at the topics for which policymakers need more information. And so that's a rolling agenda, and these topics can differ one year compared to another. In order to reach this goal of providing this information, they have established a large network called the Environment Information Observation Network, which gathers something like 1,800 experts from 38 countries. So this network goes beyond the borders of Europe. And in this network, the work is divided depending on the topic in so-called European topic centers, and there's 8 of these topic centers, and 2 are very relevant for the work that I'm going to present today. It's the European Topic Center on Circular Economy, of course, and Sustainable Resource Management, and the other is the European Topic Center on Climate Change Mitigation. Obviously, well, that's more than enough. As an introduction, let's look into the content. Primary question here was, we have a lot of information on national energy and climate plans. The EEA, European Environment Agency, they collect all the information from all the member states in Europe on the climate plans. They list all the measures that are in these plans, and they have a large database that collects all these measures. And what I wanted to know is, if we look into this large database of policies and measures related to climate, do we find any measures there also in terms of circular economy, measures that really focus on supporting the circular economy? Because, as it was said in the introduction, we know that circular economy is an important catalyst also for reaching the climate targets. And then the question was, do we find any evidence of that in the climate plans today? And the answer was, well, no. In fact, circular economy is not well represented in climate plans. If we have like a total of 3,000 policies in this database, only 5% of those policies have something to do with circular economy. And if you look into these 5%, what is more is that only half of those are something else than waste management. So 60% of those 5% are related to waste management. So if policymakers think of doing something with circular economy in order to support their climate policy, then they just think of waste management in the first place, and they don't think of any other types of circular economy strategies. Well, is that bad? Well, not really, because waste management is important, right? And we can see that in Europe, all these measures that have been taken on waste management, they have already resulted in a large drop of emissions in the waste sector. So since the 90s, we see that we have dramatically reduced emissions related to waste management in Europe with something like 30–40%, and this trend is going on. It's expected to go on. And if you look into the details, then you see that most of these emission reductions are related to the fact that we have banned a lot of landfilling in Europe. More in particular, the landfilling of waste, organic waste, biodegradable waste, of which we know that the biodegradation of that waste causes a lot of emissions, methane emissions, and methane is a very strong greenhouse gas. So it has an effect. The only thing is, of course, waste management only represents like 3–4% of all the emissions in Europe. And so if you halve those, then, well, that will contribute to the total climate target in Europe, but not a lot. So we should do more. We have nice circular economy plans in Europe. And if you try to link those to climate plans, then what we see in reality is that most of these interlinkages nowadays just are related to waste management and to efficient production. And then the question is, what about all the other CE strategies that we know? In CE plans, we talk about eco-design, we talk about product service systems, we talk about the sharing economy, we talk about a longer lifespan and reuse of products, all those things. They all, of course, could have an additional effect in terms of emission reductions, but we don't do much about those other circularity strategies. Just to illustrate a bit more my point about the potential effect, we did an exercise, a modeling exercise also for EEA, with a few scenarios that we have compared. The first scenario is that you would introduce a climate plan in Europe where we only focus on fossil fuel use. First one, the classical approach, we think of climate, we think of energy, renewable energy. Well, let's say we reduce the fossil fuel use by 2030 in Europe with 34%. What if we achieve that? What would that bring in terms of emission reductions? Well, the answer is there. It's like an 18% reduction of emissions in that 10-year period. What if we now add recycling to this plan? We think of circular economy, and the first thing we then think of, or most people think of, is recycling. What does that bring? Let's say we increase recycling rates from the 40% we are now in Europe to 70%. That only brings an additional 1%. So we go from 18 to 19% reduction. So it helps, but not a lot. So we need to do more. And more, that means we also need to take measures that really limit our material consumption. In the end, what we have to do is reduce the consumption of primary resources, whether you like it or not. That's how it is. And circular economy, of course, contributes to that. The bottom line, circular economy, is trying to make use of the products that we have for as long as possible, on a high level well, just for as long as possible, so that we reduce in the end our material consumption. What does that bring? Well, there the picture was a bit complicated in the sense that it really depends on the materials that you focus on. For certain types of materials, if you would only focus on reducing the consumption of non-metallic minerals, for example, in the building industry, concrete and all that stuff, then the addition to the climate plan is rather low. You go from 19 to 20% reduction of greenhouse gases. If you are a bit smarter and you really focus on the materials that matter in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, like biomass or non-metallic minerals of certain categories, then you can go up to a climate effect of 25%. So from 19% reduction to 25% reduction. Just to say that it's really important, first of all, to also look to these measures that try to limit material consumption. Secondly, not to just go for a mix of materials, but really try to focus on the materials that matter. Try to remember that. We'll come back. And so what does that learn for the future national energy and climate plans? Well, maybe we should look into the way we report in those climate reports. Because obviously nowadays, as it is now, countries don't have a lot of incentives to introduce circular economy because it doesn't really help them to produce the right figures. What I mean is that national climate plans, as they are today, they are about reduction in territorial emissions, contributing to the global climate targets. In these climate reports, what you have to list is what kind of reductions do I realize in the industry on my territory? What kind of reductions do I realize in the way I produce the power? what is the share of renewable energy, how is transport in my country, those things. Those are all related to the country's territory, whereas if you want to introduce circular economy, what you will see is that the effects are on consumption footprints. And consumption footprints, they deal with embedded emissions, not necessarily impacting the territorial emissions. So you can take a lot of CE measures, and then in the end, what the authorities see is that in their climate report, those measures, they're not reflected in better climate results in the reports, because the effects are not necessarily bound to your own territory. If you start thinking of circular economy, it's about footprints of materials that are used and consumed. It's about embedded emissions, so the emissions that are related to the way these products were produced. And these products were not necessarily produced in your own country. No, they were traded, so you can import those emissions, you can export those emissions, so the calculation becomes a little more complicated. And that's why most authorities don't go there. That's a bit remarkable because for the corporate world, we already expect companies to do this kind of exercise. We have the greenhouse gas protocol with the scope 1 and scope 2 and scope 3 emissions. And so a company, they are more and more forced not only to look at what goes out of their chimney, the emissions of their plant, their production plant, so their territorial emissions. No, they also are required to report on scope 2 emissions, and those are emissions related to their energy use, and even scope 3 emissions, emissions upstream and downstream their value chain. And we also have, for the products, someone already mentioned the product passports in Europe. There you look at the products, and there as well, you look at the whole value chain from the conception of the product until its end of life, whereas in climate plans, we only look at territorial emissions, direct emissions, and we ignore national consumption footprints, and that's what we need to really embed circular economy in national climate plans. So there's quite some challenges if you want to integrate CE policies in climate policies. As I said, first of all, there's the cross-sectoral nature of circular economy. You should not just focus on one sector. If you introduce these circular economy measures, most of them cannot just be related to one sector. In most of the cases, things are cross-sectoral, and so countries should find a way to incorporate this in their national greenhouse gas accounting systems, one way or another, just to start this evolution. Secondly, as I said, climate plans are about territorial emissions, whereas circular economy is about non-territorial, so we should have more attention for those consumption-based footprints, and we need a balanced approach in reporting, where we try to look at metrics that relate to territorial emissions, but also try to look at metrics and have targets for consumption-based emissions. And then, a small footnote. If you start trying to calculate the impact of circular economy in terms of emissions, then you will see that there's also a danger of rebound effects. That's what we already know from energy policies. In Europe, we forced people to, or we supported better insulation of homes, for example, and what you see in the end is that people have a better insulated home, but then they don't care too much anymore about their heating system, or they would, instead of just heating one room, they would heat the whole home, and then in the end, the overall energy consumption doesn't go down as you would have expected. So that kinds of rebound effects could also be applicable to circular economy, and it's still quite difficult to handle these if you try to model and try to calculate what would be the effect of CE in your climate report. Luckily, we become more and more aware of all these challenges, and we also know that there's only one way to get out, and that's a stepwise approach. First of all, what we need is to raise awareness about these interlinkages between CE and climate plans, because a lot of countries have circular economy plans, and then next to that they have a climate plan, but most countries don't think too much of trying to interrelate those, whereas there are some real gains there, of course. So that's one thing, try to break those silos. Second step is then trying really to identify the best measures, and that requires some calculation. Well, in a first lean approach, you can just look at experiences from other countries. There are numerous examples of countries that have already played with some of these measures, and where you can see whether things work or do not work. A more comprehensive approach would then be to try to model your own country and see where the real hotspots are and what could work in your own situation. But that requires some modeling exercises which are not that simple, and it requires also some scientific background knowledge to do so, as I already illustrated. Once you have done the calculations and you know where to go, then you start integrating these CE measures and the targets that you have defined based on your calculations. And you can start introducing these in your national climate plans. And the next step would then be to look at your regulatory framework, because what we see today is that there are nice ambitions in circular economy. For example, in plastics recycling in Europe, there's many examples nowadays. There's large ambitions for recycling, but what we see is that the regulatory framework is not adapted to that. It's a framework from the past where waste was just seen as a problem that had to be solved. And for each waste stream, you had to look for an outlet, whereas nowadays we have to look the other way around and see how we can produce as much secondary raw materials as possible. And what you see is that companies that try to do so, they often are hindered by old legislation that stems from a time where the whole paradigm was different. So often you have to change a bit your legislation to make things work. Once that is solved, you can start monitoring and start learning from what you see in the field, and the whole policy cycle starts again. You can adapt things or go further. And that brings me to the key takeaways for today. I want you to remember that, of course, circular economy is an important approach to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through more efficient and reduced material flows. So bottom line is circular economy. Why does it contribute to climate policies? Because in the end, it helps to reduce material flows. Circular economy actions are generally underrepresented in national climate policies, which is a pity, and that's also something you should remember. So let's try to do something about that. And if you would like to start these things, know that it's not going to happen overnight, but it's a stepwise approach that you should take. And there's a lot of guidance out there, not at the least provided by the European Environment Agency. I have noted here the references for those who want to know more and want to read more. And if you don't like reading, just come to me and ask. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Now we'll go with our second speaker, who's Alasdair Hedger, Senior Expert in Circular Economy Measurement and Reporting at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in the United Kingdom. The foundation is an international not-for-profit that works collaboratively with businesses, policymakers, and investors on shifting to a circular economy. Please.
Thanks, Annie. So we've heard, or we know, how important or how shifting to the circular economy can help tackle half of global emissions. And we've heard where circular economy is showing up in countries' emissions. So building on these findings, how do companies' circular economy activities show up in their emissions accounts and in their targets. This is where it gets interesting, as in reality, companies are unable to see the impact of their circular economy activities in their emissions accounts and in their reduction targets. Why does this matter? Well, the lack of accurate emissions data is a critical barrier for them in being able to demonstrate the business case for circular economy activities, which in turn slows the transition to a circular economy and slows the delivery of net zero targets. This is a message the Ellen MacArthur Foundation heard from our network. But all is not lost. In collaboration with companies, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation have set out to resolve this. We set up a working group of companies from a diverse range of sectors to gather their experiences and potential ways forward. We focus our thinking on the greenhouse gas protocol, as it is the world's most widely used framework for measuring emissions. The greenhouse gas protocol are really keen to receive our insights on emissions accounting on circular economy activities, as they're currently in the process of updating their standards and guidance. And the Ellen MacArthur Foundation are taking this opportunity to inform into these updates. So what do we find? We found that currently the greenhouse gas protocol standards and guidance inadvertently disincentivizes and even penalizes circular solutions that mitigate emissions. At the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, a circular economy is based on 3 principles that, when implemented, will support our economies to work within planetary boundaries. The 3 principles also connect with taking climate action. The first principle of the circular economy is eliminate waste and pollution. This focuses on stopping waste from being generated in the first place, with an emphasis on the upstream design of products, operations, and business models. To give you an example in connection with climate, in the automobile sector, designing cars with fewer and lighter materials could save the sector up to 89 million tonnes per year. In addition, designing products to last longer, such as durable cars, can also save emissions. The second principle is about keeping materials in use, either as a product or, when this is no longer possible, as components or raw materials. For example, material recycling can generate energy savings compared to extracting virgin materials. Steel recycling uses only 10 to 15% of the energy required to produce primary steel. The third principle, regenerate nature, focuses on supporting natural ecosystems rather than degrading nature. For example, by applying techniques such as cover crops, the emissions linked with growing certain crops can be reduced and the carbon sequestration ability of the soil is increased. So if these are some of the ways circular economy can support climate action and reduce emissions, how do the current greenhouse gas protocol standards and guidance disincentivize circular solutions? Let me give a few examples. First, on durability. Durability is a key design element that supports a number of circular business practices, such as rental, reuse, and repair models. However, companies are currently disincentivized for increasing product durability. Companies are required to report the future use phase emissions of a product in the year of sale before these emissions even happen. This prevents a fair comparison between short-lived linear products and long-lived durable products. A company selling washing machines that last 20 years will report 4 times more emissions in the year of sale per product use than another company selling washing machines that last 5 years. So the durable product looks worse in emissions accounting, even though it has a lower overall emissions profile than manufacturing 3 additional 5-year washing machines. Second example regarding end of life. When products are incinerated, the greenhouse gas protocol allows the emissions to be reported as 0. This is allowed regardless of whether it is the company that uses the energy generated. So companies establishing strategies that keep products in use are competing with rules that allow linear practices such as incineration to report 0 emissions, even though substantial emissions have taken place. And third, another example is when companies use rental models aimed at delivering value and revenue with less resource use. These business models change ownership structures. By doing so, emissions usually reported in Scope 3 value chain become part of companies' Scope 1 emissions. Scope 1 emissions are the emissions from sources that a company owns. Financial institutions, however, are only required to report the Scope 1 and 2 emissions of the companies they invest in, not Scope 3. This means in the current accounting system, companies switching to rental models will look worse in the eyes of investors, even if they have an overall lower emissions profile. This is because their Scope 1 emissions have increased. The company's Scope 1 emissions has increased. And investors, they too are affected. They are making decisions based on partial or even wrong information. So these are just 3 of the many examples and potential ways forward the Ellen MacArthur Foundation outlined in our recent report, improving emissions accounting to accelerate the circular economy transition. In this report, we outline 5 areas that need to be addressed to create a fair and accurate emissions reporting for circular economy activities. The greenhouse gas protocol standards need to improve the overall clarity and consistency in how circular economy activities are treated in emissions reporting. And the standards also need to improve guidance on how to report on circular material inflows and procurement, product use and durability, circular material outflows and end of life, and financed emissions. Diving into this topic of emissions accounting is key to strengthening the business case for circular activities in companies, showing it adds to companies' resilience and the meeting of climate targets. For us, as we go forward, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation are feeding into the Greenhouse Gas Protocol standards, revisions, and we're encouraging others to respond to as well, especially when the public consultation opens next year in 2026. I am on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Technical Working Group in the Scope 3, part of the Scope 3 Technical Working Group, currently working through the updates. So what are my 3 asks for you? Organisations working to accelerate the circular economy transition. Firstly, read our paper and share it widely through your media channels and with your stakeholders. Secondly, follow updates to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and respond to next year's public consultation. And finally, most importantly, continue to be ambassadors, both internally and externally, on the role of the circular economy in achieving climate targets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alasdair. Our third speaker is going to be online. She is Monique Lempers, Chief Impact Officer at Fairphone in the Netherlands. Please, Monique.
Yes, hello. Here I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good morning, everyone, and greetings from sunny Amsterdam. Bonjour à tous. It's really a true honor to participate in this conference from a distance. And I'm really excited to share with you today Fairphone's commitments to a sustainable future and the concrete steps that we are taking to achieve net zero emissions by 2045. To start with a super quick introduction on what Fairphone is, because I can imagine that not everyone in the room is familiar with Fairphone. Actually, Fairphone began 12 years ago as a campaign. So we weren't a company, we were a campaign driven by activists, tech enthusiasts, who were dedicated to expose the role of conflict minerals in electronic supply chains. And fast forward to today, Fairphone is now a tech company competing in one of the most competitive industries out there. Although we have evolved into this competitive business, our core is still the same. We still have a major passion for impact, and we're still dedicated to our mission. And that mission is quite straightforward. We want to make electronics fairer by extending the life cycles, the lifetime of our products, by rethinking materials, and by transforming the supply chain from inside out. Our philosophy really is rooted in creating products that last. The most sustainable product, we always say, is the one in your pocket. It is the one that you don't have to replace frequently, because the biggest part of the footprint, production, is in the production phase. It's about 80% roughly. And so when you double the lifetime of a phone, for example, you almost cut its footprint by half. So that's why we're designing phones and other products to be repairable and to provide long-lasting software support and to build them with the durability in mind. You see here an image of an exploding phone, Fairphone 5, and it shows the modular design of the phone, of course. Each component, from the earpiece to the USB-C port, is designed to be easy repairable and replaced. And this modularity is key to extend the lifetime of our devices and reducing its waste. This graph I really like because it illustrates actually the longevity of Fairphone devices. So you see here the 3, the 4, the 5, compared to the wider market. So what you see is that actually a significant higher percentage of Fairphones remain active in use, even well, at a certain moment, the average in the market goes down. Yet what you also is that the impact of these product lifespans potential. I've posted here some data that we're actually going to publish next week in our impact report, but it shows that we significantly avoid CO2 emissions, freshwater use, raw material extraction by extending the span of our devices. So avoiding one of the steps in circularity is really core to our strategy. On top of that, we also have a commitment to reach net zero by 2045, as I already said. This is also core to our business objective, and it drives our strategy and our actions. And as I indicated before, production is biggest part of the footprint of our devices, and overall, scope 3 is really the scope where our biggest footprint is. It's really more than 99% of our footprint. We don't have a scope 1, and we don't have our own factories or whatever, and scope 2 is only the energy used in our office. So it's really, the rest is 99% and more is scope 3. This is really everything we do in our supply chain, upwards and downwards, from extraction to the extraction of raw materials to the use and the end of life treatment of our products. To address this, so to actually live up to our commitments and reduce our footprint every year, we set targets every year that drive then the decisions we make around how we develop our products, how we organize our logistics. And we identify then key focus areas where we think that year we can make most difference. So the ones that you see here is just an example of what the key actions are that we have defined for this year. Starting with, making sure that we increase the use of renewable energy in the production of our devices. That's from final assembly to manufacturing of key components like displays, batteries, cameras, memory chipsets. So really, based on our footprint and based on where we know that we can drive an agenda that year, we will engage with the suppliers and bring renewable energy in, either by connecting our production to existing ways of renewable energy that the factory itself is already generating. And if not there, then we either ourselves or the supplier invest in renewable energy credits from the same market from the same net that they are working on, like, for example, in China, so that we increase the supply of renewable energy within that market. And we, at the same time, also ensure that there is a plan to get direct renewable energy set up in the factory over a certain amount, a certain period. So that is one. Also there, actually, for renewable energy, it's important that we get the right data. That's always a challenge. So LCA data, getting the right data from suppliers is really something we're focusing on. Then the second one is cleaner logistics, obviously. So increasing the use of ocean shipments, because that has a far lower footprint than air freight. That is one of the key aspects that we're working on. And lower greenhouse gases in the use phase by designing our devices in a way to be more energy efficient, in essence. Also, we try to prioritize to expand in certain markets where there's a strong use of renewable energy. So all in all, that together makes that we, that every year we take a step further towards that goal of net zero. And of course, beyond our own operations, we also advocate for broader system change. So this includes policies, actions to create a fairer market for sustainable electronics, because we really think that a level playing field is needed to drive industry-wide progress. And we're advocating for a few agendas, boosting consumer demand, of course, because we do need more demand for sustainable products through educating about the current e-waste issues and support for the right to repair. We also advocate for strengthening regulations to promote durability. Supply chain due diligence also really important. Incentivizing sustainable businesses through tax benefits, for example, or procurement advantages. Driving industry standards that are harmonized and are also reflected in certifications. And we call for increasing supply chain transparency to ensure accountability. And we set the example ourselves with providing a very transparent report every year. So a lot to be done, but seeing the commitment also here reflected in the room, I think together we can really create a more sustainable and fair future for electronics, but also for other sectors. So the time to act is now. And again, I'm thankful to have been able to share this with you today.
Thank you very much, Monique. Now we have like 24 minutes for questions, discussions. So if you have any questions, you can go. There are 2 microphones in the room, so you can go to the microphones. You can also use the app and write down your questions. Donc, si vous avez des questions, vous pouvez utiliser les micros qu'il y a dans la salle ou utiliser l'application et écrire vos questions dans l'application. Je vais pouvoir les poser à nos présentateurs. Et comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, n'hésitez pas de choisir la langue de votre choix. Donc, on va gérer la traduction sans problème. So, are there any questions in the room? I have a kind of spot in the face, so I don't see very clearly who's there. Oh, there's one here. Yeah, please.
Hi. Is it perfect? Great presentations from all of you. Thank you so much. My question was about assumptions in calculating your GHG impact. For a lot of circular economy models, their positive impact depends on assumptions. So for example, like in a packaging as a service model, your return rate would highly affect your GHGs, or your damage rate in a rental model. Is there a systemic way or a recognized way for coming to these assumptions if you're in a startup or sort of at the early stages of one of these models that is recognized by the consumer or the person you're selling to as realistic, but also can show the climate impact?
I guess the question is addressed to me. It depends a bit. From what I understand is that your case is like really a business case. It's not on the global or the economic level that you want to do the calculations. If you are a startup and you want to see what the impact is of your business model on your carbon footprint, so to say, then there are some standards, of course. There's first of all the LCA standards that we can refer to, which are international, and there's ISO standards on how you do an LCA, but you probably know that. And then if you go to the company level, there's a lot of guidance documents from the greenhouse gas protocol that you can look into, but we know, of course, the fact that there isn't really a standardized approach in modeling, and certainly not if it comes to scenarios. That's really a weakness of the whole system nowadays, and that's also one of the things that we made clear in the work that we've done so far for the European agency. And well, they're well aware nowadays in Europe that there's still a lot of work to be done, to be honest. So I can't give you anything that is ready and out there. You will see that there's a lot of ways to start calculating the greenhouse gas impact, the emission impact, and one of the things, if you if I now go back to the national energy and climate plans, I said there's really not a lot of plans where CE is incorporated. If it's incorporated, it's about waste. The other 40% where it's not about waste, and yeah, you look then into those plans and whether they have calculated or not the real impact, then you just come to the conclusion that it was in only like 10% of the cases that they had done an effort to try to calculate the impact of CE on their greenhouse gas emissions. So it only shows that there's still a lot of work to be done, and especially on the standardization, making sure that people take the same type of assumptions, as you rightly say. They start from the same assumptions. They have like standardized ways of building a scenario. Those are all really important because as it is today, you can really not everything. It's the Wild West. Everything does it its own way. You just take a consultant and they will help you and they will produce a result. But you can't really compare those things. And as a customer, it's really hard to see who is right, who is wrong, and what you should trust, I have to admit. So you have a good point there. And yeah, it's one of the weaknesses that we still have to face today.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think on that is being really, really clear about what you want to measure and why. I think particularly if you're seeing circular economy as, depends what your end goal, if it's a means to end. Is it about circular economy and helping to reduce emissions? Is that relevant for your strategy? Is that of interest to your stakeholders? Or is it about measuring material inflows? Is it about how circular economy is making you money or saving you money? So yeah, I think we've talked a lot about today of measuring circular actions isn't necessarily showing up in perhaps the greenhouse gas protocol. There are standards out there, like Tom mentioned, for LCA, but I think there's still other ways that you can measure the impacts of your circular economy. I think what you really want to be measuring is what helps you to demonstrate the business case, what helps to unlock the business case. I think that's what I was just going to add.
Thank you. I'll take a question from the chat. I think it's more for Alasdair. So would the proposed changes to the GHG protocol make it more complicated for corporates? Have any pilots with corporates been done?
Really good question. I think from working on the GHG protocol standards, one of the things that they are trying to do is they're not trying to make it more complicated. There's a lot of vagueness out there. There's a lot of a lack of clarity. So what they're trying to do is provide clarity. If you provide clarity, that makes it much more easy to understand. There's a lot of optional reporting. There's lots of, circular economy isn't really, there's guidance for recycling, but beyond that, there isn't anything there. So the idea is really to make it easier. And if you make it easier for companies, it's much easier to demonstrate the business case.
Thank you. I think there's a questions here in the room.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. Very good. Quite happy that Fairphone was here today because I've been having mine since 2019. I've been having the Fairphone 2 and now the Fairphone 4. Working great for now with the Fairphone 4. Can't wait for them to be here in Canada because it's still quite complicated to have them in Canada. We have to work with my family in France. But anyway, my question was more towards, I work for a city and I seen that the stepwise approach was more on the national level, but I'm considering of how can we could apply a strategy similar or apply the strategy to our policy, and maybe if it comes from the upper level, from the national, or maybe the World Organization would prepare every country to have these kind of approach so that we can have on the territorial basis, we'll be able to be more proactive on different actions. I don't know if my question is clear, but I mean, I'm trying to know how the city can work with the stepwise approach and different policies that can implement in their in different ways. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one one of the recommendations would be to try to extend the metrics that you use to follow up the evolution in the area where you work, to extend that from these very simple territorial emissions and extend it towards consumption-based emissions. I mean, in the end, the thing is that you have to reduce the flows of material consumption, and you do that through circular emission measures like different systems, product service systems, repair systems, trying to think of where could we just use less, and concepts like sufficiency are popping up there. And for all those types of measures, there are like indicators available, and what I see, for example, in my country and in Belgium, is that regional authorities, they have nowadays a whole set of indicators that they follow up, just to have a more holistic view on how consumers are behaving in their region, and how that affects their footprint in the end. So what you try to achieve is a different way of consuming less, consuming products which are of higher quality, that last longer, that kinds of things. And there are metrics to follow up those evolutions. And so the recommendation is to try to not only focus on one or two things, but try to have a better overview of evolutions that happen in parallel, and that all contribute to another type of economy. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's if I look to the talk that I brought today, then that would be the recommendation.
Thank you. I have a question on the chat for Monique. So would if Scope 3 is largest for Fairphone, how do you engage suppliers to get you the information you need to do more specific calculations, for instance, with LCA?
Yeah, really good question, because I think that is probably one of our biggest challenges. So we, obviously with our assembly manufacturer, we have a direct contract with them. It's easier. But especially when you go deeper into the supply chain, second tier, so component suppliers with whom we don't have a direct contract, it makes it far more difficult. So yeah, we have a team of people that works together also with our assembly manufacturer to reach out and engage and set up programs and explain what our mission is, explain what our target is. It's not always possible, so we also need to pick our battles and work with the companies that are at a certain moment willing to collaborate with us. We of course try to motivate suppliers with showing them that there is an increased demand for suppliers that also have a green way of working and a green profile. But that's not always enough. So then it requires different ways. We are quite creative in that.
Thank you. I think we have, a question on the microphone right here.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Karine. I'm with Anthesis. We're a pure play sustainability consulting firm. From what I've heard from this panel, it seems there's really a large disconnect with certain sectors or types of reporting that don't include Scope 3. So the example that was given by Tom with territorial inventories, only looking at Scope 1 and 2, and the example that Alasdair gave with financial companies also not looking at their Scope 3. Well, in the case where companies would be looking at all of their scopes and they would be implementing circular business models, We can see some examples where this would in fact lead to a reduction in purchased goods and services with a reduction in materials. And let's imagine that there is no rebound effect and it is in fact displacing new production. Do you see, and of course, let's imagine that the reverse logistics is not adding more to the impact. So my question would be for Alasdair, do you see any parts of the GHG protocol inventory guidance that would also be, you would say, a disconnect with being able to measure the benefits of circular business models?
Yeah. So the paper that we've published actually goes through a number of those kind of disconnects, both in the upstream and the downstream perspective. Certainly from the purchased materials, we found that really there isn't any kind of incentive to keep products going once they've made. So companies will report their emissions, but actually there's no, if that product gets reused, it's zero emissions. There's no incentive for that product to be kept. And actually there's an alternative is just to go to landfill where it's zero emissions. So there's a complete disconnect both in the upstream and in the downstream. Again, there's no guidance on companies that are extending life. The GHG protocol standards are largely built around, or the assumption almost, that once something comes to an end of life, that's it. Actually, what we're seeing in circular business models, a lot of products, what was considered to be end of life is now coming back into play, and there's no way the GHG protocol doesn't necessarily capture that. So yeah, both from the upstream and downstream, there's this disconnect. The other aspect a number of companies are thinking about is, okay, if it's not showing up in emissions inventories, there's also the avoided emissions impact, and that's a whole other topic, and there's a complete Wild West on that as well. But avoided emissions that we consider to be completely separate to emissions inventories. Avoided emissions are hypothetical, and it's not something the GHG protocol currently focused on. But I recommend to monitor developments in the avoided emissions space as well.
Thank you.
I'll take a question that's on the chat. So for Alasdair, what has been the response from the GHG protocol on incorporating circular economy models within GHG accounting? And can you clarify that at a global scale, transitioning to circular economy will help reduce GHG emissions by half?
Yeah, happy to respond on that. The GHG protocol, they're currently going through the revision process. Actually, a few years ago, they did a survey to get feedback from organisations, and circular economy is part of that survey. And they're very, very responsive. In our engagement with them, they're very understanding this is an area that it needs to be considered. So that's the first part. I think the second area, I would point towards the MacArthur Foundation's paper, which is called Completing the Picture. That sets out the data behind that. But yeah, we found back in 2019 that half of global emissions come from production consumption, and that's also data that corresponds with data from the International Resource Panel as well, which links into IPCC. So yeah, roughly about half of global emissions come from or need to be reducing energy transition, and the other side is from the circular economy.
Yeah, I just would like to add, because it's really important to understand the greenhouse gas protocol. That's for companies to make their sustainability reports, and they want to calculate their climate impact. That's one thing, and that's totally not that's totally different than the climate reports that countries are making, just to show what their contribution is to reaching the global climate goals. So you can't just add up things and then go from greenhouse gas protocol to the other. That's just not possible, and that's important to understand. But I just wanted to add, for greenhouse gas protocol, I've worked with a company that was thinking of introducing a circular business model, in the sense that it was a large leasing company. They were leasing IT material to offices, all kinds of companies that were leasing those laptops and smartphones and so on. And so this leasing company, they wanted to start up a new business line with refurbished laptops and smartphones. And then you feel what they need and what they would like to see in this emission report or their emission accounts that they make up according to the guidance of the greenhouse gas protocol. They would see there some incentives to start up this business line, and also some guidance in how to translate that to their customers, and what would then be their benefits to start using these refurbished appliances, because also those customers, they want to make a climate report and a sustainability report. So, and that's what's still lacking in the greenhouse gas protocol nowadays. The guidance on scope 3 is not developed far enough to just give some answers in those cases. What to do with those emissions? Who has to report on what? What happens if you use a product for a second or a third time? Can you amortize emissions over a longer period, over several use times? Those kinds of calculation rules, how to allocate emissions to the user versus the leasing company, that kind of guidance, that's what's still lacking. And well, I had some contacts with Greenhouse Gas Protocol at that time, and they are very well aware of that, and I'm happy to see that they're taking this serious and they're working on that. So it should work out within a few years maybe, but and it's really something the companies want, but they want to have something they can work with and they can build new businesses on.
Thank you. There's a question here.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. Greg Zilbrand from Beyond 21 Academy. We're a Canadian non-for-profit, and we work with academic institutions and professional organizations on their education and experiential impact focused education, specifically around circular economy and climate. My question was coming from what we do, which is one of the messages is that there is no one size fits all solution when it comes to circular economy. And one of the things that was mentioned a lot here is quality and longevity, which the quality piece is understandable. The longevity piece, and I think this is asking the question about things that don't fit into that model. So we talked about washing machines or cars. If we all had washing machines that were 30 years old, or refrigerators that were 50 years old, or vehicles that were built in the 80s or 70s, our energy efficiency and our emissions will likely be higher as a population from the use phase. So in your research and in your work, have there been exceptions to these rules, or sort of a threshold beyond which it doesn't make sense to make something last beyond a specific time period?
I'm happy to go first on that. I think the other thing is it is a very good question, because the other thing companies need to consider is a lot of the production and consumption part. If that's for some particular products, it can be a huge area. So if you, rather than it prolonging a product, you then go make something new, there's a huge amount of emissions in the production consumption side. I think it's where the data is really needed. Data is really important to be able to help companies and stakeholders make those decisions.
Yeah, very good question, and I don't have the answer, to be honest. And indeed, as you say, there's also lack of data to try to simulate those things. In this particular case, with the IT appliances, try and find some data in the market on how long these appliances are used, reused, refurbished, you name it. And I guess companies, they have this information in the end. I mean, Fairphone, they know how long their appliances are used. They just have shown a graph. But then, and then, yeah, going back to that example, sometimes it depends on very small things. The number of updates you get on your smartphone, that in the end just defines the lifetime, because in a lot of cases, an iPhone is not broken after 4 years, but they just stop updating the software, and there you are. And so there's many aspects to be solved before we get back into a system where appliances are used for a longer time. It's a kind of a pity that sometimes I feel like I have to explain again to the people that they should rather repair something than throw it away. Whereas in my grandparents' time, that was a no-brainer. I mean, you try to repair something first and then you threw it away. Nowadays, we're back in that, back there and trying to explain to people why they should repair.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to add. I think coming back to this as well, building what Tom said, this is why design for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is really at the heart of the circular economy. It's designing from the start whether you want something to last and what happens to the end of life. If there is the infrastructure in place to bring that back, what happens to the products and materials after that as well. So just thinking about the design element as being really key.
And maybe if I can add this, indeed, I think with a lot of consumer electronics devices, the case that the production phase really is the largest part of the footprint. So it then still remains super important to ensure that you use the materials that are used in the production for as long as possible. Meaning, indeed, build durable, easy to repair devices. There is, of course, some uptake in making it more energy efficient. We also, well, as I showed, do that with our device, but the percentage that we gain with that in terms of footprint reduction versus extending the lifetime is really small. Of course, there must be devices where that's a bit different, but overall, I think, extending the lifespan is the most impactful strategy. For sure, this, for example, with cars as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we'll stop here since it's time for lunch. So I don't want to be the barrier between you and your food. So I want to thank you again, Monique, Alasdair, Tom, for your great contributions to this session. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for attending this session. So I hope that you'll have a nice event and a nice networking lunch. See you later. Bye-bye.